Joining us now is Nick Papandreou, the outgoing president of the Interfraternity Council. Nick started his term nearly 2 years ago at the start of winter quarter 2020. Nick, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So just for my first question, I was wondering, what are some of the highs and lows from your time as Interfraternity Council president?
Yeah, I think what we did is we had to hit the reset button with the IFC where we were when we came into office. The IFC, fraternities were closed down for fall quarter, and right before that was the abolished fraternity sororities movement. So for us, there was a lot of criticism that we had to address, and that's partly the reason why I ran. So I think some of the highs there has been, I think that we've been very successful in doing that and kind of switching what fraternities kind of think of themselves as they are on this campus, increasing the accountability in the Interfraternity Council and bolstering our ties with the university. I think those are things that didn't happen before. I think some of our lows, you've seen the news. We started off our term with a very difficult situation over at FISI. We had to address that. That was my first day as events being able to happen and me being president of the IFC, so that was kind of difficult. And we, started fall quarter too. I mean, the news with the 2 chapters, that was a difficult situation that we're still handling.
Okay, so I know you mentioned sort of the abolished Greek life movement, sort of reflecting on that movement and how it happened very early into your time as the IFC president. How did you grapple with that?
So I think most people kind of dealt with the abolished movement as the enemy. I didn't think that was the case. One of the first things I did with them was that I reached out and wanted to talk to them. I think although our end goals may be very different with the abolished movement, and they still are, of course, I think there's a lot of common ground. They do want to see more accountability in the Interfraternity Council. They do want to see fraternities promoting more values-based engagement and membership not being contingent on the social aspect in itself, but more things. And have more cooperation with the university as well. So those are things that I think we could find common ground with them and kind of work on, even though, again, our end goals are definitely different.
So I know you're saying that your end goals are different. Obviously, the end goal of the abolished Greek life movement is to abolish Greek life. What would you say your end goal is?
My end goal is I do want fraternities and the campus to kind of have fraternities be put on the same pedestal or level, if you will, as any other campus group. There shouldn't be the case that fraternities are expecting better treatment from the university or having their members be more relaxed on regulations from this campus. I think that's really important. Because at the end of the day, if you do that, you promote a safe and sustainable and healthy fraternity environment. And at the same time, if you also ensure that this engagement of members with fraternities is one based on values more than anything, you create a more sustainable fraternity life in itself.
So I know you're saying that sort of one of your goals for fraternity life on campus is to have it as the same level as any other club or organization on campus. How does that work with students having designated fraternity housing when other clubs or organizations don't have those facilities?
I think the facilities are a sort of thing that would, much like the membership is only for males, in the case of fraternities, females, in case of sororities, or anyone who identifies as such. The same holds with the housing, and I think that's a differentiator. At the same time, there are groups on this campus that, Evans Scholars and PMA, they're not necessarily the fraternity type of fraternity, and they still have houses. I think the house can be it can be a resource, I think, for chapters if used properly. It can be a space for academic engagement within members of a particular chapter. It can be a space for development of individuals. So I think the houses have been associated and have become a problem with people because of the things that happen in them and them not being what you should expect or fraternities should be doing on this campus and any campus really. But at the end of the day, if you make sure that fraternity houses become spaces for growth and development, I think that will be a better situation for everyone.
So how would you go about making a fraternity house a space for growth and development?
Yeah, it really goes back to the values-based engagement that I was talking to you about. Every fraternity has its own values. My chapter, Sigma Phi Epsilon, has virtue, diligence, and brotherly love. If you focus on those in the membership and everyone joins to kind of enjoy those values and develop based on them, I think at the end of the day, the fraternity space becomes a space where people can come together on the basis of those values and build, memories and relationships and, work on, say, classes together. If you remove that element of the fraternity membership in itself, X person wants to join a fraternity just because of the parties, then that becomes a problem for fraternity life and the houses and campus and everything.
So I think a lot of what you speak on in terms of what you want to see from Greek life falls more along the lines of Reformation, whereas the abolished Greek life movement wants more of abolition of the
Yes.
system. What would you say to students who don't believe it's possible to reform Greek life?
I think it's a fair thing for people to consider, right? It's been years that this behavior in fraternities has happened. I think it's gotten better over time, but it's still nowhere near where it needs to be. So it's very natural, and I understand when people are kind of skeptical towards reform. But I think when you look at the work that we've done, right, we took a fraternity community that just thought it was, previous IFCs, and I said that in a op-ed that I wrote in the Daily. They did enable, they did not really do anything for bad behaviors in the fraternity community. I think when we came along, that changed. That's why you see chapters kind of being held through our accountability, holding processes, but also chapters being given the tools and the resources in order to develop their members. And I think overall, when you think of every fraternity was approaching campus and their existence on this campus as one based purely on the social experience, and most of them have kind of now switched to providing more holistic experience, I think that's a success in itself and shows that some chapters can make it through that reform process and thrive.
So when you're saying you feel like changes have been made to the system and that it's been over a year now since the Abolished Greek Life push began, how do you balance sort of your belief that reformation is possible and that change has been happening with the alleged druggings that happened earlier this quarter?
So I do want to be very clear about how I phrase this. But from the information that we have from NUPD, and that was the first couple of weeks of after the druggings, no fraternity person or fraternity affiliated person was under investigation for those druggings. They were not identified as involved in those. They did happen in fraternity spaces, and that's something that we know, and that's why we're holding, we put through both API and SAE through our process of, the standards board, and the university has done the same. But I do want to be very clear in that they were not, the person or the people who did the druggings are not, as far as I know, from 2 weeks after the allegations, they were not fraternity affiliated, and I have no updates from that ever since. Of course, that may change. Not everything gets to me, but that's what we know as of then. And Keith Garcia, who's the director of FSL, also released a statement to the housing corporations of the fraternities about that. Now, the accountability process, I think overall, and the druggings themselves, I think kind of showcase the problems that exist, as I said, with having fraternity spaces, having open parties. All these are behaviors that are conducive to bad things happening. We do see bad things happening everywhere, all around campus, even residential halls. But again, we were not doing our part in making sure that those are mitigated in fraternity spaces. So it's really about this dual-pronged approach of, one, making sure that we provide chapters with the resources and the tools to understand what behaviors could be conducive to having risk in any particular event. And also, again, not making them the end-all be-all in the fraternity experience. And at the same time, it has been about, when that doesn't work, being there to hold somebody accountable when kind of things slip through the cracks, as it were. So that's why we're there. That's why we talk with Lucas over at OCS, and that's why we talk with FSL and the student affairs team. And we have open channels of dialogue. And the chapters also know that, and we're very clear that, that's going to happen. So it's that dual-pronged approach.
When you're talking about having these houses and having them embrace sort of the ideals of the chapter, I know you said one of your chapter's ideals is brotherly love. How do you have how in your mind does this space exist where one of the ideals is brotherly love, but it's a space where many students on campus would feel unsafe because unsafe things have occurred in those spaces? So again, I think, as I said, it's very, I understand that people feel unsafe, and I would probably do the same if I were on my side, because again, it's been years that this has been happening. But it's about what IFC does, right? Actions speak louder than words, and I think this executive board, in conjunction and in cooperation with chapters, have done a lot. We immediately identified the risks that existed, this particular quarter, and we immediately paused our events, and we're still in that pause. It's been 3 months now. That started with it being just 3 weeks long. So we identify the risk, we step in when necessary, and we evaluate how we need to proceed. And now, this week, actually, the IFC, 90% of members of the entire IFC at Northwestern are going through, at least 90%, are expected to go through workshops and an entire curriculum that's very different than the ones that we were going through before. It's not online like Northwestern does. It's in person, a curriculum for minimizing risk, understanding the privilege that
exists by being in a fraternity, by being a member of a fraternity, and how to minimize risk and how to develop based on values, as I said.
Okay, so can you explain to me just a little bit more about what this process entails of the training and education that they're going through now?
There's 4 steps. So it starts with, so everyone registers, first of all. There's the expectation, and we're working hard to make sure that 90% of people who are in fraternities register for that, which is a very big number. And once you register, you receive a reflection guide. You have to, do it to go to the workshop itself. And that talks about, things like toxic masculinity, talks about the values of each chapter, talks about privilege, and all I think all the things that are problematic currently with fraternities and having people understand those. They go to the workshop then, a 3-hour workshop in person, that these things are discussed in a group and people share, share what they talked about, and kind of with the help of CARE, SJE, MARS, CAPS, and all those people, we work to kind of advance forward a vision of fraternity life that will embrace those values that need to be embraced. Then there's another reflection that happens on the basis of the workshop to kind of see what people took away and how they'll be moving forward. And then as the 4th step, the IFC Executive Board comes in and meets individually with each chapter, and they talk about the entire process, how that was and how that fits into chapter's plans going forward into winter quarter and beyond.
So I know you mentioned some university organizations that are involved with this. Are those the people that are running these workshops, or who is running those
Yes,
workshops?
those are, so we worked with FSL on those. IFC and FSL worked in conjunction to reach out to those organizations and develop this curriculum, and it is being run by professionals who know how to do this the best.
So I know you said in an email before the interview that this is the first time sort of on those workshops that IFC, FSL, and the university have been on the same page.
Yeah.
What was that like before? Were you guys not all on the same page?
I do think that, if you look at previous years, IFC was rarely on the same page with the university. That was a very different approach that the IFC took towards fraternity life and embraced most of the things that I think are now are considered problematic, and were in the past problematic about fraternity life. I've sat down with Julie Payne-Kirschmeyer. I've sat down with FSL. We have open channels of dialogue between us 3 as bodies, and we have developed this strategy that this curriculum that I talked to you about is going to be the short-term stuff that we do, but there needs to be long-term engagement with the fraternity community to advance a culture shift at this point of the fraternity community to one that is, as I said, based on values, safe, healthy, sustainable. Yeah.
Okay. So at the start of winter quarter, you will no longer be the IFC president. What advice and what do you think has changed over the course of your presidency, and what advice do you have for the next president to sort of come into this situation?
I think what's changed is that the IFC now sees itself very differently than it did before. It now really serves and has to continue to serve as the middleman, the liaison, however you want to call it, between what campus wants, and there are very valid concerns, what fraternities want, and fraternities have valid concerns as well, trying to find that middle ground that advances both sides forward. It must not side with fraternities as it did before. It also, by the principle of self-governance, cannot side completely with with campus overall. So it's about finding, where the two visions meet, where fraternities need to kind of push forward and endure some changes that need to be made. So that's really important. That's the first thing. And the second is having open channels of dialogue with campus, but the university in particular, because the university really wants to help and provide us with the resources. So those are the 2 things that I would say are different about our term up until now. And I would advise the next president to kind of do the same. We've already chatted about those things, and I'm very hopeful.
Okay. So just reflecting sort of on your time, what kind of impact do you feel like you've made on the Northwestern community and on IFC?
Yeah, I think we're now at a point where when something goes wrong with fraternity, so we'll start there, people know that the IFC is going to step in. People know that the IFC is going to be working to do the right thing at the end of the day, even if it means holding a fraternity accountable, and that, there's competing interests, if you will, by governing yourself, essentially, fraternity people governing other fraternity people. But again, it's about, removing yourself from the situation and making sure that you do the right thing in those situations. Make sure you step in, making sure you put a pause on what's happening in a particular chapter, the community if necessary, and working to resolve those issues. That's not something that happened ever before. It was very much that, like, let's cover this up type of situation. So that's the one thing. The other thing is, from the university's perspective, they also know that the IFC is working to do those things, and we're what I want to think of as a trustworthy partner to carry out what the university would like us to do. That's why we've worked with them in partnership for our ban this quarter, for example. And finally, I think the impact that we've done that I think is the most important in terms of our long-term aspirations for our community is to advance forward that notion that where we are is not sustainable, the status quo doesn't work, and we have to move forward with the reform that is meaningful and it's going to endure. And I think that's something that we started with our Vice President of Member Development, our Vice President for Standards, and everyone on the IFC Executive Board in cooperation with the university and FSL in particular. So that sort of approach towards changing our ways at the end of the day is an impact that I think we've had.
Thank you so much, Nick. That is all the time we have for tonight. Thank you and good night.